Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Hello, 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 and welcome to episode 23 of Meditations. I'm your host, Ryan Slomak, and this is an interview show all about making space for conversations with interesting people just to see what we can pick up along the way. If this is your first time tuning in, one thing you should know about me is that I unabashedly love a little town in upstate New York called Syracuse. It's my home. It's a place I take a lot of pride in. And part of the reason I love it so much is because it's full of fascinating and hardworking creatives, including today's guest. On today's show, we have Cayetano Valenzuela. And if you are unfamiliar with that name, you most likely have seen his artwork. He painted the We Are the Mighty Salt City mural right outside Fireman's Park, which is something that has been featured in music videos and on postcards and in campaign videos and all over the place, just to demonstrate the soul of Central New York. He also created the And I Still Rise mural, which is featured on the west side of Syracuse. But he's so much more than just a muralist. Cayetano is somebody who is an inherent collaborator, somebody that is very passionate about finding ways in which his art can help lead his life. And he's somebody that just has a fascinating story to tell. So rather than just listening to me gush onward, let's hear from Cayetano. Cayetano, which we've already decided I'm pronouncing wrong. You'll have to teach listeners that as we move forward. But you are someone that I very deeply associate with the underground culture of Syracuse. But you grew up in Houston, Texas. And you've got a little bit of that. Tell us about your kind of upbringing and growing up in Texas.
I was born in Houston and I bounced around as a kid between Houston and San Antonio. So it was sort of a tumultuous upbringing, I think. There was a lot of violence, poverty, alcoholism, and stuff like that. So it was a tough upbringing, and we grew up in the inner city. So there was there was gangs around, and I wasn't technically in a gang, but me and my friends were that's where we were headed to. And we had our little group, and we got in fights and stuff all the time. And I think whenever my mom met my stepdad and we got away from my biological dad, we moved up to here when my stepdad got transferred from his work. He worked for an airline. And so we moved up from inner city to the middle of nowhere, upstate New York, which was Hannibal, New York. And it's literally a one light town. And so it was really jarring, quite a culture shock.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
You're not somebody that I associate with aggression or violence or anything like that.
No, and I'm not. I'm really not. But when I was growing up, that's what was all around me, and so you had to be tough. And then when I moved up here, I experienced racism really for the first time, because where I grew up, it was all brown people. There was a couple of white families that were there. My best friend was white, but everybody else was Mexican or black. There was I didn't have a lot of experience with white folks until I moved up here, and then there was maybe 3 minority families in the entire town, and one of the families was only here during they were the migrants' kids, and they were only here for a couple months of the year, so we really had no connection whatsoever. And so when I encountered racism, I was just I do what I know how to do, and that was it was aggression, and that lasted for quite a while until I met my girlfriend, and I was just oh man, I don't want to be in trouble all the time. I want to hang out with this awesome lady. So I was just let me calm down a little bit, and then I get to not be in school suspension all the time, and that really calmed me down a lot. And that is when we met in high school. We ended up getting married, so that's my wife now. Yeah,
fascinating.
Melissa.
Yeah, the calming factor, the weighted blanket of your existence.
Absolutely.
How old were you when you moved up to Hannibal?
I think it was 11 or 12. I don't remember exactly. It was in the summertime. But a lot of, even I was just talking with my sister about it. A lot of our memories are just sort of blocked out. You know what I mean? So it's just there was the Texas time, and then there was the New York time, and then there was another era of going back and visiting with family, and sort of rediscovering oh yeah, this is where we come from. This is our people down here in Texas.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like so I moved for a much smaller distance, like an hour away from Binghamton to Syracuse when I was like 11 or 12. And I always feel like when we talk about trauma, like just uprooting yourself and having to like reacclimate with like an entirely new group of friends, an entirely new school or whatever, like it transforms us in a way, but it's also kind of like, so it's this horrible thing that happens, but it's also this like preparation for like, the way in which you move forward with life.
Absolutely. And it was like it was really difficult for a while. Because I mean, first day of school, it was like immediate. Like I was just like, we're fighting. That's what I'm doing. But I was also like a funny kid. Like that was my other mechanism for like just getting through stuff, was like being funny. So like half of the kids like thought I was like hilarious, and the other half were like, we hate you, and that, so like I hung out with like this sort of group of like quote unquote popular kids, but I was like, I feel like I can't be myself. So then I saw my sisters were hanging out with like the grunge kids and like alternative kids. I'm like, that seems better. And I remember just sort of like, there was this girl that I had wanted to go out with, and they were just like, oh no, like she's poor, you can't go out with her. And I'm like, I'm poor, like, what do you mean? And I was just like, all this, like, it felt like I was pretending. So then I was just like, I am not myself. So I was just like, just like one day I was just like, I cut him off. I'm like, I'm not with you anymore. Like I don't want to be your friends. And I came in wearing the clothes that I liked to wear. Was like sort of like, at the time it was like, Soundgarden had just come out with Bad Motorfinger, and like, Nirvana was just coming out. So it was just like flannels and like ripped jeans and stuff like that. And it was just sort of, they're like, oh, we're not hanging out with you anymore. I'm like, good. Like, I don't need you. So then I just started hanging out with my sister's friends, and they were like, grunge kids and punk rockers and stuff like that. And that was sort of like, you don't really fit in anywhere else. You can come and not fit in with us. And so we were like the freaks. They called us the freaks as like a derogatory, but we were just like, no, we love that. So like in our little school, we were called the freaks. Like, so that was my group of friends then.
That was like the second gang you joined.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. I like, I like you end up going to Purchase to study art, and I'm curious about like what role did art play in your life when you were kind of growing up? Like,
Well, I mean, I always tell people, like, I came out with the pencil in my hand. I was always drawing, and because we grew up poor, we didn't really have like money for things like food, clothes, that sort of thing. I mean, it wasn't always bad, but it had gotten pretty bad at points. But my mom always had a pen or pencil and paper in her bag. So whenever we'd go somewhere, like there'd be times where like she didn't have like a sitter, so we'd go to work with her, and like just at night she would go and repair photocopiers or made copies, or I'm still not really sure what exactly she did, but I remember sitting there like in an empty office building, and I just had paper and drawing. She would give me these huge reams of paper. They kind of had the holes on the side that were all stuck together, and that was my sketchbook. So I just was drawing and drawing, and then being at my grandmother's house in San Antonio, just like to get away from like the insanity, because it was a big Mexican family and there was a lot of craziness that was going on there. So I was just like drawing the whole time, and I loved it, and I never stopped.
so drawing all the time, like what type of imagery were you trying to replicate, or like what kind of style was calling out to you when you were younger?
When I was younger, I think I was just making worlds, just kind of like making like new, like it was escapism, really. Like, I mean, that's literally like, it was a way to just like sort of block everything out. And I was a very hyper child too. So it was like the one thing that I could do that was like everything, the whole world just kind of becomes quiet, and I can make my own little worlds to escape into. And like, I used to watch, there was a show, oh, what was it called? Uh, he would, it's Secret Worlds or something like that, but it was like Captain something, and he would be like draw, and he would draw like these huge like overlapping worlds of like underground tunnels and like cliff sides and like little trees and stuff. Very cartoony, but I loved it, and I started doing the same thing, just making these worlds, kind of like, this is me like going into these worlds. And then also like there was a lot of imagery around us. Like, I mean, growing up with no audio, there's like there's painted signs everywhere. There's big murals of like, Aztec warriors and like lowriders and like people in zoot suits. Like across the street from my grandmother's house, there was a big mural behind that was painted on the back side of a store that was like, this mural is, dedicated to the people of La Raza, and the culture of our people and stuff like that. And it was like, pyramids and like the Aztec warriors and lowriders and stuff like that. And so that was just something that was like all around. and we grew up Catholic, so there was like religious imagery all around us and stuff like that.
That's cool. Like that sort of nature of observation seems to just have been like born into you as much as like the pencil in your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it was like there's culture and music all around us. So like there's always music on the weekends. Especially in San Antonio, like all the family would come over. We'd have like a big barbecue, or like there's always a fire, and there was music playing. My Tio Larry was always like singing and like drinking, and and that kind of stuff like got out of hand. And that was sort of like one of the touchdowns was like, you can party, and then after a little while you better make yourself scarce because it's going to get crazy, you know what I mean, or dangerous.
Interesting. When just looking at, I guess, one more element of your youth, like, was there a type of culture that you tried to rebuild, or you missed and wanted to replicate from moving from Texas to Hannibal?
Not at first, because at first I was just trying to like make it so that it wasn't, so I didn't have to fight all the time. And I was just like, I just want to make cool stuff. And actually around the time too, there was some kids that were a little bit older than I was that were into drawing comics. And, there was a group of kids that were like maybe like a year or two ahead of me that were in my sister's grades that were drawing comics. And I'm just like, that seems cool. Like, I want to draw comics. So, I was kind of sort of drawing comics, but I didn't even know anything I didn't know who anyone was, superheroes or anything like that. But I just knew that they were like making something really great. And I'm just like, this is cool. And one of the, like in our group of friends, there was one fellow who was like one of the greatest people ever to know. And he was a creative named Stan Helvey. And his clothes were covered in paint. He always had paint supplies with him. He painted everything that was around, and he made sketchbooks out of, he would rip the insides out of old encyclopedias and put pages in there with tape, duct tape, and staples. And I was just like, that is amazing. It's like super, just like, he's just like, it's this artistic creativity is just like pouring out to such a degree, it can't be held in. And that was a really big influence on me. Not to mention, like, he was a beautiful kid, super nice. We all loved him. And then, the summer before my senior year, he was shot and killed, and it was like it just shattered everything. And it was sort of like you realize, like, oh, we don't last forever. We can die. Us kids, like, we can die. And that was like, I feel like that was really formative for me, to be like, like, well, then we better do something with the time that we have. We better do something, because he did in a way that none of us were really like. We were not to his level. And so I was just, so even now, like in every studio that I've ever had, there's a picture of Stan that goes with me to be like, he's not able to like bring forth his artwork. So like in part, like I'm making artwork for the artwork that he wasn't able to like put into the world, and just to keep his memory alive within the work that I make.
Wow.
Yeah.
And my apologies for getting timelines mixed up. Stan was in Texas or was in Hannibal?
In Hannibal.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having that sort of like immediate loss at that moment where you're about to step into adulthood.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, cool. Like, now's my time to like demonstrate this part of myself and have this person that I've looked up to be able to experience it with me and clap me forward. And then that's just gone.
Yeah, it was tough, man, for all of us, because he was like the king. But whenever he would, because he had left our school to go to a different school around that time, and so whenever he would come back to visit, it would just like among us, like the whispers would just like travel ahead of him, being like, Stan's here. And so everybody, like during like our class switches, we'd be like, we're gonna go find Stan and say hey, and like see what's up, and like just like everybody wanted to be around him. He just had this like this energy and this beauty about him. And like so yeah, like when we lost him, it was like it was a shattering of like the world that we thought of how we thought the world was.
It's interesting too, and just like the way in which it sounds like he rethought mediums. Like an encyclopedia can now be like it's now my own I don't know, like synthesized version of my own artwork, and kind of going from there. And I think that's one thing that's really interesting about your art. And I have a question later on just about your kind of obsession with mediums. Like, I love the way in which you just we're gonna get there in the future. I'm gonna leave it there, listeners. But I guess Thanks for sharing that story. Like, obviously, he was a big influence on you. But what other, as an artist, like we eventually find our voices. And I'm curious about like before going to college, like you knew you wanted to study art, like you knew that was like
Yeah.
the path you wanted to go down. But like, what did you want to do with that force of nature?
At first, I didn't really know. I just knew that I knew that that's what these hands were meant for. That's like I know that I was like given a gift. Like I have this thing that I need to do something with, and so I just wanted to make art in any form possible. And I really didn't. I didn't even know like how to make money with it. I knew that I wanted to like be able to pay bills and stuff with it. Like that, I wanted it to be my life career. I didn't know how that worked though. But what I did see was skateboard art, like, alien workshop boards and like girl skateboards, like all those kind of like just cool graphics that were really flat and just like bold. I really dug those. And then also just like once I got into like, punk rock and stuff like that, I was looking at like punk graphics and just being like the circle jerks, like Running Man, like I'm just like, that is super cool. Like, how do I make that? Like, so I was constantly figuring out like I can make like these cool drawings. And then eventually I did get introduced to like comics through my best friend's little brother, and he introduced me to like Sam Keith and Sandman books, and I was just like, oh, I thought it was just like superheroes. Like I had no idea there was this whole other way of making work, and it just sort of like it fit right in with like zine culture because we were also making zines and like getting into Maximum Rock and Roll and like writing to catalogs. There was this catalog called Angry Young and Poor where we would get our spikes and studs from because there was no place locally that we could get unless we got there was one guy downtown who was like super like supportive, and he's just like, what kind of stuff do you guys want? We're like, we want spikes, we want studs, we want leather boots. He's like, all right, you got it. And so we would order them and we'd go and buy them, and he'd give us a steep discount, which was ridiculous. Great fellow. Yeah, but he owned Catmandu and Midnight Sun. Jim Dolphin, he was a great guy.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
The what one I hate this generic question, but I'm curious. Like, you're making zines, you're doing stuff like that. When was the first time that you saw people kind of like impacted by your art, or like you worked on something that like you saw that relationship between like I've communicated something and here's people responding to it?
Well, it was really that was actually like early on because it wasn't just drawing on paper. Me and my sisters, we founded the drama club at our school. There wasn't a drama club, so we're just like, we want to put on variety shows and art shows and stuff like that. We don't know how to do it. We're just going to figure it out. And so we started meeting just a bunch of us friends because there had been a drama program at a school, the Red Creek School, and we were friends with some of the Red Creek kids, but there was nothing at Hannibal. So we created Purple Gallery, and I'm pretty sure it's still going today, and that was 25 years ago. But we did a variety show, and people loved it, and we're just like, that was amazing. Like, let's do it again. So we just kept on doing it, and we're writing little skits, and like some of them were dramatic, interpretations of dance, and like so it was just like all of us like around that time there was like this energy among our group of friends, and even my art teacher Peter Mahan, he was like there was that time when there was a lot happening. There just seemed to be like a confluence of like people and creativity that was just happening around that time, and it was centered around Stan. It was centered around me and my sisters. It was centered around some of the other like the musicians and artists that were like in our group. Glenn Pryor was part of it, and he's still doing stuff with Caitlin and them guys. So like a lot of the people that were making art then are like still making art now. So there was just like this energy, and so we started Purple Gallery, and like just seeing like people would come and they pay for the tickets and they would cheer, and I was like, that is really cool. Like we made this happen. And we were, we're starting bands at that time, so there was bands being like playing there, and we also helped start a drop-in center through Oswego County Opportunities, just to have a place to hang out. Since there's nothing in that town, we went to the initial meetings, me and my friend Becky and Melissa, my girlfriend and my now wife, and we were like, well, we'll be the students that help actually get the word out and start putting it together, and that I think that also still exists. I'm not sure. It's all grant run, so some of the grants come and go. And so that was sort of like my first indication, like we can actually do things, and people will respond, and people will show up. And so starting a zine, we were able to write to bands, and bands wrote back and sent us $1 and the CD to review, and it was really cool just making these connections. Like even with bands like, far away in other states. And that was sort of like, oh, this is a thing. Like, people are alive out there and making things. And it was like, we kind of realized also when we got Wheels that we can go to Rochester and find Monroe Street and hang out and, like, be punk rockers and, like, charge up our mohawks, and, like, there's other, like, punks out there making music and doing things. So I think that was sort of like when I realized that, like, something that I helped make was impacting other people. And I think, like, when we're making cuss words, our zine, like, I was just like literally, it was like cut and paste and, like, showing people the mock-up, and people were just like, oh yeah, like, let me know when it comes out, like, it'd be awesome. And I was also making comics in the back of one of the yearbooks at the school. They were like, I mean, they're terrible, but people looked forward to reading them, and I was like, this is cool. I like this feeling.
That's amazing. I think it's like, it's so important to learn that you can impact the world no matter where you're geographically located. And I know people who, like, retire and still don't learn that. And, like, to figure it out when you're like 16, that, like, if I'm willing to use a communication channel, I'm going to send somebody a postcard with a stamp on it and see if, like, their message reverberates back to me. Like, that's just such a huge thing to be able to figure out at, like, such a young age.
Absolutely. And I really feel that, like, it's like, thanks in large part to, like, punk rock, just the DIY ethic of just, like, I mean, I think it also comes from, like, my upbringing. Like, we don't have much. We have to make whatever we need, you know what I mean? And the same thing in punk rock. If there's nothing there, you make it happen. And so if there's no scene, you make the scene. And that was like, same thing in college. We did all sorts of, like, creative stuff. As when we left college, we came back and did creative stuff, made things ourselves, and just made things happen.
Well, let's thank you for giving me the perfect segue to go to college. As we're at a college right now having a conversation, right? You went to SUNY Purchase in '98. Like, what Purchase, is known as, like, the artsy SUNY school. Like, it's just, I remember when I was looking at college, that's what it was. And having taught for a number of years and helped students figure it out, like, that's the school where you go if you're interested in performance or drama or illustration or sculpture. What drew you to Purchase, and what did you do with your time there?
Well, what drew me to Purchase was, it was sort of accidental. I got accepted to SVA and SCAD, which had illustration programs, and which is really what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do sequential art. But it just, like, I talked to the counselors and my folks, and they're just like, just financially, it's just not in the cards. Like, we just don't, there's no way to make it happen. And so I was distraught, and I was walking through the halls, my senior year, thinking, like, my life is destroyed. I don't know what I'm going to do. And there was a substitute teacher. I wish I could remember her name. She was awesome. Like, she was like, you could tell she was a rocker. Like, after school, she went off and, like, and rocked. But she saw me in the hallways, tears in my eyes, and she's like, "What's going on?" I'm just like, "I don't know where I'm gonna go to school. I thought I was gonna go here, but I can't afford college." And she's like, "No, hold on, check it out." Like, I remember if it was her niece or nephew. She was like, "They went to this school called SUNY Purchase. It's filled with a bunch of weirdos. You're gonna fit right in. You'll love it. So go check it out." And so it's just like, that's something. It's like, it was anything, And she's like, "It's super affordable. You can do that. You can get to a SUNY school." So I went and visited, and I was just like, "Oh, this is actually great. Like, I love it here. Like, and it's right down by the city. So it's like a 20-minute train ride to get into the city, and you can check out all the galleries you want. There's going to be, there's St. Mark's Place. There's all these, like, punk rock bands and stuff that I'm just like, I can go and see shows. But also, like, just the energy in the place was great. So I ended up applying, and I got my acceptance letter like super late, like 2 weeks before we were supposed to show up, for, like, orientation. So it was just like skin of my teeth. I went to Purchase, and then I loved it. I absolutely loved it there. They didn't have an illustration program, but they did have a drawing and painting concentration. And like with anything, like, I found a group of friends that were, like, super dedicated. They wanted to push further, and we'd stay all night in the studio, and we had, like, this group of 4 of us that were just like, after class we'd hang out still and just continue drawing and push each other forward. And then and also around that time I met some really good buddies that were, like, into poetry and music, and that was the kind of stuff that I was into, and punk rock, but also jazz and experimental music. So it was like my world just sort of, like, opened up really wide, and I was just like, there is so much to explore. And it was just like deliciously entertaining on all levels. And like, so there was a group of friends of mine, and I'll give you an example of some of the things we did, where we would get together in the basement of one of the buildings where their suite was, and we'd, at first we just started out like there was a party there, and someone had wine, and so we went there and we're like smoking cigarettes and like, drinking wine and hanging out, and then someone was just like, we're artists, like what other kind of stuff you do? Like, oh, we play music. Oh, I write poetry. Like, oh, you write poetry too? And I'm like, yeah, like we write poetry. And so he's just like, oh, check this out. So he started reading some of his poetry, like in his sketchbook. And then I'm just like, oh, sweet. Like I got some in mine. And so we started trading poems. And this guy, Matt Hottenroth, great fellow. I loved him. He was from Long Island. And he had this really thick Long Island accent, but he was just such a teddy bear, but also a tough guy. So we were reading poetry to each other. And then somebody came in, they had a guitar. And I'm just like, pluck a little bit of that. So they were playing guitar as like over the top of the poetry. And we're just like, yo, that's really cool. So then we're like, let's get together again, like next week, and just like, we'll bring more poetry and more instruments. And so we went back. Someone brought like what do you call it? Like a shaker egg thing, and then so they're playing that. Someone brought a guitar, and then every week we just kept on going back. And then more people discovered what we were doing and came to just hang out. And like we were hanging out, and like, we're drinking a little bit, and like, but it was more like a bohemian sort of like vibe, which was like really different from like the punk rock world that I had known. So I'm just like, let me explore this. And there was a musician that came, brought a violin. Someone came with the cello. Someone came with the bass, and like it just became this thing that was happening, happening in the basement every week, and people from all over would come and like watch us and like listen and like interject like with their poems and stuff like that. We ended up like deciding like, this is cool, like we should take this out, like we should go and like see if we can get like a show. Like, what even is this? I don't know. Live poetry, slam poetry, kind of, sort of, like kind of, but also jazz and just like experimental music with poetry over the top of it. And then we booked a show at Campus Center South, which was like just sort of like a building, had a stage, and people came out, they loved it. And like afterwards, people were like, "Yo, that was the livest thing I ever seen." Like, and it was just us, like a couple of poets and a bunch of people just playing music. One of the musicians we had was like an absolute genius. I don't remember his name because we didn't really know him. He just came and he brought different instruments every time, and it was fantastic. And it was a really beautiful thing. And it was sort of like, you know what? That was really cool. We're like at the top, like, let's stop, let's do something else. And then so those guys got really into printmaking. So they were just like printmaking in their room and like, going to the studios and like, also I'm painting at the same time and like, playing music with my other group of friends. But it was just like, this was the energy at Purchase. Like, it's just people were just like making things, doing things everywhere. So no matter what, like when you're on what they called the malls, like a big open area, there's going to be people, riding unicycles in clown outfits, or someone like filming a part of a movie, or like a drum circle, but no drums, like just all kinds of like weird stuff. And it's just like a typical day at Purchase.
That's amazing. And I just love that theme that I just see throughout your career of like, I'm not sure what's going to come out of this, but this is the resources that I have. And the idea that like, I've never thought of you as a performer. Like, I'm really just curious about like that side. I'm like, oh, interesting. Like, okay, when he's not like focusing his attention painting signs and making sure that the lettering is perfect, like maybe he's secretly a comedian.
I don't know about comedian, man, but yeah, I played guitar and mandolin and stuff like that. So we had a little band that we played around here a little bit. Me and my wife and my friend Jen, the Secret Hots, just like a little indie punk rock band. And my wife was the drum. We had seen Tilly in the Wall. I don't know if you're familiar with that band. This is a band that came out of like the Omaha scene with Bright Eyes in them, but they had a tap dancer as a percussionist. And so and my wife grew up tap dancing, so I'm just like, "You want to be our percussionist?" She's like, "Yeah." So we built a box and mic'd it, and like she was our drum set, and we played indie rock.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we played here a couple of times.
Sunia Swigo has seen the performative elements of
Yeah.
Cayetano.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I just think it's so important that like, I don't know, we are willing to like learn and absorb those experiences where it's like, wait, this is the magic that happens when I don't say, oh, this isn't my vision, but these are the resources we have and what can come out of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always like I'm a naturally curious person. Like I want to know, and I feel like I will never learn enough. Like I always want more and more knowledge. Like learning is literally my favorite thing in the whole world. Like that's my drug of choice is learning. Is like I want to know about, strange things happening in the world, beautiful animals, or I want to learn about neuroscience and like quantum biology, or like quantum biology. Well, there is like quantum biology, like in how photosynthesis works. There's a quantum element to it, which is really interesting. But so there is like all that stuff. Like I love, like I'll just put it on while I paint, and I'll listen to like these like luminaries in whatever field like talk, and I'm just like having my mind blown while I'm painting letters, or drawing my comics.
I think learning is my drug of choice have to be your next t-shirt design.
Right on.
So you went to purchase like with the goal of illustration, and they didn't have that program. Like what how do I say this? Like, did you end up creating your own illustration kind of concentration there? Were you like making other types of art? Like what was
I was making another type of art because they really pushed concept very heavily at purchase, because it was like everyone was just like, push the boundaries, like go as far as you possibly can, and just like into the idea. So it was like it became like the art. I realized which was also an interesting avenue to pursue, was like art as philosophy. And so I started like, and with poetry and jazz, we were also exploring philosophy, thinking about like the beats and how they were exploring like Zen Buddhism and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, what else is out there? Like, what other philosophers can I learn about? And one of my buddies was a philosophy major, and he's like, he's feeding me like Nietzsche and Kant and stuff like that, where like his level of knowledge was way higher than mine. But just like the idea of like, how do we form new ideas, or how do we push the boundaries of like what art can be within these ideas, things that we're trying to say. And so I began making really conceptual work that ended up becoming really personal and very heavy, like talking about the trauma of like like my upbringing, and talking about some of the violence and stuff like that, and but also the homogenization of culture. And so my work became like, by the time I left Purchase, my fine art work was about the homogenization of culture, which in the larger like a context of like American society. And so that was the work that I left with, and it was like flat imagery, bright colors, but no faces on the figures, to be like almost like an even graphic across the picture plane, but with like these like just beautiful colors. But like as I was moving up to that work, I sort of like went through this like dark tunnel of like, I'm gonna talk about all this trauma and try and work through that. And that was like, it almost like I had a mental breakdown like during my like nearing my senior thesis, and I was like, I can't make this work. I can't. And at the same time I was taking a writing class, and I was writing about this stuff as well. So it was like all trauma all the time. And so as a sort of like palate cleanser, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go back to my love of comics. I'm going to make these little comic strips, little cat head figures, and like the cat head was sort of like my sort of like alternate what do you call it, the like a alter ego, and so it was just sort of like, it was a way of veiling the self by wearing a cat mask. But then it was just like these funny little things, and I would tape them on my door, and then my roommates would be like, oh, like they'd read them, and then they'd wait for the next one to show up on the door. They'll just take it down and put a new one on there, and people were like looking at it and like liking it. And so I was just like, this is really fun. I love doing this, and it's way easier. So it was sort of like, I go to the studio and make the work that's really heavy and hard to make, and then I go home and make this like really light, comic that is like sort of tinged with tragedy, but it's funny, tinged with tragedy. And so when I left there, I had the fine art body of work, but in the background I had the comics that I still really loved. And as soon as we left college, I'd been scared, thinking like, how do you make a life in the arts? And one of the stories I tell when I talk about this stuff was there was an artist who was among our group, a year older, and left school, and his work was amazing. It was so beautiful. I don't usually like get down with abstract work, but his work was like out of control beautiful, and he made these huge paintings that were just gorgeous, that sort of hinted at architecture or like some sense of place, but you couldn't put your finger on it. And it was that sort of like this strange, uh, uh, real, not real sort of thing going on in his paintings. And we're just like, if anyone's gonna make it, he's gonna make it. And he went to the city, and we're just like, dude, he's got it. Like he's got it. Out of all, like he's gonna be the first one, and we're gonna be like, yo, you tell me what to do next. And then he came back a year later, like while I was working on my senior thesis, and I saw him like from across the field, and I knew that he was gonna go see a buddy of mine we called American Chris, and I was just like, yo, Chris, like tell him to come to my studio when he comes through. I want to talk to him. And so he did. He came by my studio, and I was like, man, like what's going on in New York? Like, what art, what music, like what poetry, like what's happening, like what's the story in New York? And he's like, man, like I'm just like surviving. Like he's just like trying to pay rent because the rent's outrageous. And he's like, I've been out there for a year, but I've gone to some shows, and I've made these two little like studies. I haven't really even had time to paint. He's just surviving. I'm just like, oh my god, oh my god. We all thought like out of anybody he's gonna hit the ground running, but it was just like survival mode. And I thought two things: I'm not gonna live in the city, and I've got to hit the ground running when I get out of here, because if I don't, I won't be able to have a life in the arts. And so as soon as we got back, my wife had ended up, she came here for a few years and then transferred to Purchase because they had a really good photography program over there. They had a bunch of enlargers and stuff. So she moved to Purchase, which was great. So like I got to see her all the time. And then we moved back here, and like had two goals: make a life in the arts and get married to my high school sweetheart, which I did. And so when we came back here, we were like, what are we going to do? Because we're living in Oswego. What do we have? We have like the Art Association, which is like, older folks that are, painting landscapes and stuff like that. That just didn't interest us. And there was some cool stuff that was happening there as well, but we were just like, just a different generation. Right. So we got involved with them a little bit, and we're just sort of like, we need to connect with these younger artists that are around here. So we just started like, we had made up these flyers. Me and my wife were just like, let's get together. If you're interested in art, let's do this. And as we were going to go put them around, we actually saw somebody else's flyer that was doing the same thing. And we're just like, what? This is great. Like literally on the day, we're like, this is crazy. So we're like, well, let's go to this meeting and like see what's going on. And there was we told some of our other friends about it that we knew from high school that were still making art. And we went to this meeting, and it was this woman named Jen. I can't remember her name. And she was just like, I don't know, let's just make some art or something. Let's do it. And it's sort of like this really like kind of a relaxed attitude. And I'm just like, I don't want it to be relaxed. Like I want it to be organized. I want it to like really push it. And so my wife was the same way. I mean, she was really a stickler for like, no, we're gonna do this organized. We're gonna take notes. We're gonna have meetings. We're gonna like really do this, and we're gonna get these artists together. And so we ended up sort of like taking over the group and like becoming like the head people of the group. And we created Hat Factory Artist Collective, and that lasted for a few years, where we just like got a bunch of artists that we knew. We found alternative spaces and just made art shows. We made it was music, it was poetry, it was art, it was all these things put together, kind of like our Purple Gallery days. We just made it happen, and it was sort of like we could see like there is potential here. And so we ended up doing like these auctions, and like Jim Dolphin, same guy who would order us bikes and studs when we were in high school. We went to him and we're like, do you got any space? And he's just like, oh yeah, you got to clean it up yourself, but yeah, use above midnight sun. And we're just like, all right. So we cleaned that up, and that was I think our first show was above it's where Port City is, or not Port City. It's a bar. I can't remember the name. Old City Hall, but there was like a little building above it, like toward the highway, and it was amazing. Lots of people showed up. It was like shoulder to shoulder. It was fantastic. And then the Art Association let us have a few shows there, and it was banging. Like so you couldn't even fit in there. It was so many people. Everyone was really excited about it because it was like these younger artists who were making stuff that like they had never seen before. I mean, me and my wife, we made this huge stuffed crow that hung from the ceiling that we stuffed with garbage bags. They were just like, and then just like paper crows that hung along the ceiling. And she was doing photography. I was making paintings, huge, large paintings. And like just a lot of like amazing artists that you would normally not see. We pulled a little bit from the college. And so I think that kind of like, that's what started like a schism between us and the Art Association, because like their shows were like, they were okay attended, but when we showed up and we did our shows, it was insane. And then like NPR came down from Syracuse and did some stories on us, and so we started getting people from Syracuse coming down here or up here to see our shows, and then we started making connections with artists in Syracuse, and we're just like, oh, there's like other stuff happening in Syracuse. So me and my wife we ended up handing off the reins to some other people that still had more energy to put into Hat Factor, and we're just like, let's do our thing, and like let's go up to Syracuse. And meanwhile, I'm sending work out to galleries across the country trying to get into galleries. And I got, some group shows in like Chicago and LA and San Francisco, which was nice. And that was more like the fine art stuff. But it was like the engines began rolling because we were just like, we got to make something happen.
Yeah. You're a force of nature, my friend.
Well, I mean, I feel like I have to, I feel that I have a sort of a drive in me that's like, I don't understand it, but I know that like I have to have a life in the arts. I know that that's what I'm meant to do. And so like I can't let anything like stand in my way. And like, so I'm like, by that, I mean, I'm not like a, stepping on people or nothing like that. Like, I'm just like, I know there's a way for me to get there in whatever avenue I'm like choosing at the moment. And so I just like, well, can just do it. And it's like the punk rock ethic, man. Just do it. Like, do it yourself. And so at every turn, like whenever like the chips are down, I'm just like, it makes me burn hotter to like whenever it's like there was a time, yeah, I guess it sort of segues into like, how I started my business really, because, as we were doing this sort of work, I was working at an after school program, which was the perfect job. Wake up late, work late into the night. And it was just like a few hours, like in the afternoon, working with high school kids, which were fantastic. I loved those kids. I was really sad to leave that job, but it was like one of those things that was grant funded. So, there was an economic downturn. Everybody got let go for a few years. But that sort of pushed me to be like, well, I'm going to continue just making art. And, but there was a point when, like after that, I lost that job when me and my wife were like, uh-oh, like we need money, like we need to pay our rent and we need groceries and we don't have it. And so I was in a bad place mentally, and I'm just like, oh man, what do I do? Like we need to have like at least $450, at least, but we need really $800 and something dollars. So then I'm like, all right, what do I know how to do? Like I can work with kids, but that's just not in the cards, and I can make art. Like I don't really know anything about, I never worked a retail job really. I mean, I worked at an art store, but there's no art stores in Oswego, well, there wasn't at the time. And like, I'm just not really sure what to do. So, I remember just being like in this place where I'm just like, oh, I'm a useless person. I think I'm a useless person. And it was just like, I've never felt that. Like, I'm not a person who's like ever been like really like felt like depressed, just like angry. Yes. But depressed. No. And this was like sort of like one of the first times in my life where I was like, oh, I feel depressed and I can't seem to get out of it. I feel like I had this like wet towel between me and the world. And so I'm just like, let me just take a walk. I'm just going to go and walk outside. So I remember just like, going and walking and just being like, how do I get out of this? Like what do I need to get from the world to get out of this? And then I sort of realized like, wait a minute, what happens if I flip that story around? What do I need to put out into the world to get out of this? Like, oh, it's sort of like, it dawned on me like, oh, it comes from me out, not from out in. Like my attitude and the way I view the world is like what I'm putting into the world. What can I put out into the world? And it just I kind of realized that it was like, oh, I can make things. I can put art into the world and exude what I want to feel. I want to give out love, and not just take it from the world, And so I went home and I cleaned my house, and that was also a part of like this sort of like retracking my, like I felt like a train that had gotten off the tracks. And so I went home and I cleaned, and that sort of helped me get back on the track, get back on the track of like where my neurons are firing in a creative way. And I was just like, I got this. Like I make art. That's what I do. I'm an artist. And so I'm like calling up people. I'm like, hey, you said you wanted a design for that t-shirt. I got you. Send an email like, hey, you said you wanted to buy that print. I got one left and it's all yours. Come this weekend. I'm gonna have a show this weekend at a screen printing place here. Come out, and this print is yours. $50. Whatever. And then I was calling people. I'm like, hey, like you were talking about, you wanted a piece of my artwork. Come out to the show this weekend. It's gonna happen. Like, And so I was just like hustling, like for like, all day for a couple of days I was hustling. And by the end of like a couple of days, I'm like, I got this money. And then I ended up having a show at a friend of mine's screen printing place. And like people came out, they bought all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, by the end of the show, I was just like, whew, man, I made it. Like, and I was able to be like, I showed my wife, like, look what we got. And this was just hustling, just like making artwork and like, making it happen. And there was nothing else. There was no one else involved. It was, I mean, as far as like, making it happen, like there was no business entity other than my business entity of making art. And so I was just like, well, I could do that again. And so then the next few weeks, I'm like, let me keep hustling. And I was just like, oh, I think I can make a business out of this. Like, not just like send art to a gallery, but like be my own business. And then I started making real money after that. Like doing craft shows was sort of like the next step of it. So I sort of like backed into like creating this business because people were just like, well, what is it called? I'm like, Black Rabbit. Like, I'm calling it Black Rabbit. And that name came from when my wife and I, we traveled around the country for a couple times in our van, and we came across a trading post out in the desert. And it was just sort of like this moment that was like just so beautiful, and like where I fell in love with the country itself. And it was just like, I always want to remember that feeling of just being out on the highway with no specific place to go, and that freedom. And that's what I feel like Black Rabbit is able to give me, is like that freedom, that feeling of like wonder and like joy of like the possibilities are open, And so, yeah, that's how I accidentally started Black Rabbit.
And this was in 2013?
Yeah, somewhere around there. I mean, because really, like, I was making work before then, but then I officially, like, made it into a business in 2013.
Awesome. I want to, I don't mean to turn this into like just a self-help moment, but I do want to just point out a couple things that I just picked up and that you reiterated, which is like, whenever we get down, whenever we're like having a hard time figuring out what's going on, like we always have this road behind us that like we've completely forgotten about. Like our perspective is like looking forward and it's just like helplessness. And when we look behind us, not necessarily getting nostalgic, but just like giving ourselves a moment to like pat ourselves on the back and say, look what we've done. Usually the answers are there.
Yeah.
Which I just think is so cool. And like your story just really just reiterated that for me. And then the other thing, which I think is even more important, is that like, especially when you decide you're going to make a life in the arts in America, like that is not an easy task to do. Millions before you have tried and failed. And I can promise anybody who's listening that's like struggling right now, that's trying to figure things out, that like the answer is not sitting in the dark in your bedroom staring at your phone. Getting up and going for a walk is like the number one solution to 90% of problems people have. Just I've interviewed like other famous comic artists and stuff like that, and so many of them, like, I couldn't figure out this plot thing, and it was freaking me out. And my deadline was 12 hours away, so I went for a walk with my wife, and then I got this answer. And like, I don't know. I just want to just throw that out there for listeners that like go for a walk. I dare you.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a neurological basis to that too. Like Andrew Huberman, he does a Huberman Lab podcast. He studies biology, specifically vision, at Stanford University. He has this podcast. It's all about giving out science information, which I listen to a lot. I love it. I love his show. But he talks about how like actually just the action of like moving around and like moving your eyes literally side to side can like reduce anxiety, and sort of like, so like he's always saying the same thing, like go and take a walk. Move your eyes side to side, take in new things, and that's why people talk about, they go on trips when they're feeling stuck. They go somewhere, on vacation, or, walk around, take a walk in the park, it really does have a neurological, biological basis for like changing your attitude.
I love it. Absolutely. In education, it's always like you're putting together a lesson, and you're like, is there any kinesthetic activity? And I was like, we're not going to play kickball in the middle of like a programming lesson. I'm like, oh no, that means like get up and high five people. Noted. Like there's value to that. In regards to like Black Rabbit, I mean, it's interesting to me that like you're doing all this illustration work and you're hustling, and then like 10 years later, 12 years later, all of a sudden like you have that confidence that like, I am the product, like I am the thing that can kind of make everything work. But you're also like exploring all these different mediums. Like you're getting like hardcore into sign making. You're doing murals and things like that. Like what got you kind of stepping away from the I'm going to design characters. I'm going to be thinking about, thick black lines on paper to all of a sudden thinking about like, these are the materials. This is the approach that I'm going to have when I'm painting the side of a building, or I'm going to like start routing wood in specific shapes so I can make like heart designs that people can hang on their walls. Like, when did that transition happen for you?
Well, it started with my interest in the rise of indie craft in America. There was this documentary that came out by Faith Levine and Sam Macon that was called uh, uh, Craft Nation, or something Nation, Handmade Nation, and it was all about like these punk rockers and weirdos making craft, and that's what made me interested in doing craft shows in the first place. I thought it was really cool that all these like kind of like same kind of people that were like into punk rock like me were making these really cool things and taking it to craft shows, and like there's this whole new form of craft show that was happening, and it was just, and it felt very punk rock to me, like just to go and like these people just like setting up a table and just like, you know, buy this like cool like crocheted skull. But so I had been watching her career, like Faith Levine, but I just really liked what she was doing, and at the time Flickr was a thing, so I was like looking at her Flickr account, and I started seeing like these like signs pop up, painted signs, and I'm like, I never thought about painted signs, and it turned out that she and Sam Macon were making another documentary all about sign painting, and so I started like looking into them, like signs, painted signs. That's weird. I just never thought about it. And so I started like, well, let me see if I can paint a sign, you know? And so I just sort of like, I made transfers, and I'm just like, I painted some letters, and I put them on my craft table, and they flew off. And I'm just like, that was cool. Like, that was really fun. It was really like low, you know, I didn't have to do much for it. I just painted some letters. I mean, they were all wrong at first, you know, but I didn't know that at the time, but people still liked it, and they flew off the table. I'm like, well, let me do that again. And then people bought them, you know, went crazy and bought a bunch of signs. And I'm like, okay, there's something cool here, because people are willing to buy a sign and a print and a t-shirt. And it was just sort of something that was like an attractor. People came to my table because I had these big like Syracuse signs or whatever. And then I'm like, well, let me see like how do you actually paint a sign? Like, what's the right way to paint it? And because these guys are using something, it's not acrylic. I was using acrylic just on pieces of wood. And I realized there was actually a whole skill set to it, like a correct way to paint signs. And so I started like, I sent off for like a zine that was put out by this guy, Colt Bowden, out of, I think he was in San Francisco at the time, but it was literally just like stapled zine, punk rock. And it was called How to Paint Signs and Influence People. It was like $4. And I'm just like, I got it. And I'm just like, this looks like my stack of, you know, punk rock zines that I have back here. Like, what is this thing, you know? And it showed like all these different like letter forms from different people, but it showed the strokes to create letters. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know anything about this. I am interested. So then it was just like this whole other skill to learn, something to, how I call it, I added to the arsenal. Like any new skill that I can add to the way I make art, I'm like, give it to me. Like, I want to know. Like, I want to know more. And so then I started like really looking into like, you know, the strokes for creating the letter S, the letter R, and I'm just like, there's a whole bunch of knowledge here. And then when their documentary came out, it talked about how the entire industry changed in the 80s and 90s whenever digital printers and vinyl came in. It decimated the industry overnight. So people just like, they had a job 1 minute, and then like next month everything was gone because some vinyl printer came out and it was cheaper and faster, and it was just like this sort of like, you know, crank them out as fast as you can. People that weren't even, they weren't designers, they were just someone who could push a button on a machine, but they were so much cheaper. So it just destroyed this industry. So all these old timers had all this knowledge in their heads that wasn't being passed on to a new generation, except for there was this group, again, like seemingly to me like punk rock kids and designers that were like, no, we like this, we want to know more. And so there was just these set of zines that were coming out, and you know, little by little there was this like knowledge like trickling back in, and I started like looking at all that stuff. I messaged a guy on Facebook and just like, hey man, can I like talk to you about sign painting? Like, I don't know anything about it, but like, is that even a thing? I was just, because I just like, I don't mind like just like cold emailing someone or just messaging someone, because like they're people, I'm people, you know, and that's how punk rock works too. You just reach out a hand and see if they reach back. And this guy reached back, and it was this guy in San Francisco, who I was able to just like, you know, call him up on the phone, So he's just like, call me on such and such a date. So I called him. He's just like, hey man, like no problem. Like I'm on a job right now, so give me like 2 hours and like I'll call you back. And so I'm just like, all right. So I don't know if it's gonna happen or not. But then we ended up calling and we talked for like a couple of hours. And he told me like, you got to get these type of brushes, you got to get this kind of paint. It was super giving with information, like actually like real good information. And that's and he's also, dude listens to punk rock and like, we're just like, oh, like we're just talking about all this stuff. And so I was able to like get this new information, a whole new way of making art that I'd never seen before. That I never thought about it before. And then I'm just like, this is really cool. So I started painting signs, like actually painting signs. I took some classes downstate at a residency. I went to Philadelphia and took some classes with Gibbs Connor and Mike Myers, who's from Better Letters. So like these like old timers. I mean, these guys aren't really that old, but they were like older than I am. But like they had tons of knowledge about this like almost like secret way of like making artwork, but it was very commercially viable too. And they're like, you can take this skill with you anywhere in the country and just show up and make money. So I'm just like, oh, it's like a trade skill. You know what I mean? And there used to be trade schools for sign painting all over the country, and now it's dwindled down to like one like actual trade school, like LA Tech or something like that, where like you can learn sign painting at a college level. So once I started doing that, I was just making signs to put on my craft table, and then slowly some businesses were just like, "You ever paint signs for a business?" And I'm like, "No, but have you got money?" And they're like, "Yeah, we got money." I'm just like, "Oh, this is perfect then." So I painted sign. I think the first commercial sign I did, because I had done like commissions, for people, but I think the first commercial sign I did was for Lofo in Syracuse, which was a restaurant that was like just wonderful people that ran it. I really like those people a lot. So I'm just like, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go ahead and go for it. And so I found, got the right wood and I painted it, and that worked out well. And then I was reached out by a couple other businesses, Recess, and then my buddy from Midnight Sun, he'd moved his shop up to Syracuse, and I'm just like, let me paint you a sign. Like he was awesome to us, like all through high school, college, and stuff like that. So I'm like, I'm gonna paint you a sign. So I painted his sign, and that was down in Armory Square. And so I got, just from like having stuff out there, other businesses contacted me, and so I just like started doing like commercial sign work, which led to, eventually Murals, and continued doing that stuff for quite a while. Although now I'm trying to like not do as much commercial work because it is messing with my eyes, my vision, and so which is a little bit heartbreaking. But I just like, I know I have to step back from it, just because even like old timers, like your eyes go first. Like it messes with your eyes, especially like if you don't have like correct ventilation. And like, I was working in the Dell Van studio, so I didn't really have like a fan. I open on my windows and stuff like that, but I know that it's like it has affected my vision. So I'm just like, I just have to step back from commercial stuff, So I'm not doing it as much anymore. I still am, but like taking on very, very little projects, and then like not doing, whole business stuff anymore. And then like, which also, lets me get back to the thing that I really love, which is my comics.
Yeah. I'm going to apologize for continuously not pulling on the comics thread. We're going to get there
right on, yeah, no
because
worries.
we're going to open Pandora's box when we get there. I'm so sorry to hear about your eyes, but I also think that there's something to be said about like the body eventually tells you what your limit is, and granted, we're both super young individuals. But like, when you run into that, like letting your body dictate that like I need to slow down on this, that way I can keep doing it for another 50 years is important.
Yeah. And I just know like, because the fumes act differently too, like on a large substrate than they do on a small substrate. Because if you're on a small substrate, I mean, it's a very little amount of paint that's on your brush. But when you're rolling huge, big signs, like you can't help, the fumes are like all over the place. You can't help but, have them in your eyes, even if you're wearing a mask, it's still going to get in your eyes. And so it's just like, I could tell, like just like the way my eyes like focus, like they're not able to like transition as much as they could. And like, I was just like, this is what these guys are talking, this is what the old timers are talking about, this right here. And so I was just like, oh no. So like, even like, I knew that I was just like, I don't want to lose my vision. So I'm gonna like, I have to, I might not want to, but I have to. So I'm still working on small signs and stuff like that, but making sure that I have like good ventilation. But it's difficult because it's sort of like it was such a nice like way to contribute to the community too. Um, but I know that there's other ways to also contribute.
Well, I want to talk about that contribution real quick, which is, you're known for a lot of things, but in Central New York, you made us mighty.
Right
You
on.
you painted a giant mural on the side of the XSCNY district office off of Fireman's Park that says "We are the mighty Salt City." And when you can't, like, anybody who takes pride in Syracuse can't bring somebody to get a tour of downtown without walking by this little alley where there's this amazing mural of green that just pops out at you and makes you so proud to be a Central New Yorker.
Right on.
And I was curious about like that project. You and I had an amazing conversation a number of years ago about the idea that like adding one word, the word mighty, has changed the way in which a lot of people discuss Central New York and think about Central New York. And I was wondering if you could just talk about that project a little bit, because it's such a, I don't know, like sculptures are cool and parks are cool and whatever, but like that I think has just influenced our community in ways that are just unspeakable.
Well, man, that's such a good compliment. Because that is what I hope for, in my work. Because like one of the things that I try to do is like to create positivity. Like I don't ever want to do something that's just like you know, I just don't want to put negativity into the world. I want to put magic and wonder into the world. I want to put, that's what I want my contribution to be. So when it came to this, designing this mural, I knew that I wanted to sort of pull from like Syracuse's past, and so I went to the historical society and I was like looking through some of the old things with the help of Michael Hegarty, and he was kind of like showing me, because I didn't know anything about that space of like looking through like Syracuse history. So he was able to be like, oh, this is how it works, and like what do you need? And I'm just like, I don't know, like sign stuff. And so he was able to like, he's like, I got you. So he pulled all this stuff for me, and I'm just like, oh, this is perfect. And so I was looking at just like the way that like Art Deco has sort of like made its way into like the look of Syracuse, but I also knew that I wanted to be something that like talked to the people of Syracuse, like, and of the people of Syracuse. And so I started thinking about like what does Syracuse mean? And I had a studio downtown for many years, and like I'd be walking back and forth from Armory Square to the near west side to the Delavan Center, and there'd be days where I'd be walking down there in the snow and grit, and just like there's people going to work, walking through this like trudging through this like sludge of like the snow, and it's a tough place to live, man. It's tough, because like so much has like Syracuse has been through a lot, and it's a tough city, and it's still going through it, but it's also going through it in a way, in an upward trajectory now, I feel like. And so I wanted to talk about the toughness of the people of Syracuse, and the toughness, like we have hard winters, they suck, and we make it through. Or like economy has been through the tank, and like we're still here. You know what I mean? Like we go through it all, and we don't stop. And that's what I feel like is the spirit of Syracuse. Like you can't stop us. And so the idea of being like mighty, I wanted that empowering feeling. Like we're not just the Salt City, we're the mighty Salt City. And I wanted it to be like a, I don't know, fist in the air kind of thing, and but also beautiful. You know what I mean? Because that's how I feel. Like there'd be times like walking from Armory Square toward the Delavan, and there's just the sea of crows flying over the city, and the sun is just like this pool of melted sherbet on the horizon. These buildings in the train yard, the hollow of the train, and it can be so angelic and so beautiful in its grit and hardcore, nature, and yeah, I feel like that embodies the spirit, the way I see Syracuse, and the way I think that like a lot of people could see Syracuse. It's not a downtrodden city. It's a city that gets through that like we fight through it.
I love it. And I think that like, I always wonder if like Central New Yorkers just are kind of born with these like cataracts or blinders over their eyes, where like eventually one day you're able to like remove them or take them off and be able to see what it is that like makes us us. Like I was having a moment this morning when I was like driving up to Oswego where I was listening to an interview with some punk rockers in Los Angeles talking about the sun and this, and like one made a comment about like, yeah, and I was at this recording studio where you stepped outside and you were like on the beach. And I think about like here we have More Sound Studios, which is like this very like famous, important studio, like especially for like the reggae scene, where like you step outside and there's like an overpass and like like some houses that are disheveled and whatever, and like I'm not sure like I don't know if I'd be as interested in people if we lived in a place where like I had so many distractions by weather, where it's just like, it's beautiful out, I'm going to go surfing. Like, I'm not sure if I'd have as much interest in like being able to captivate and make art for a city, like if we didn't live in a place where like we had to work for it.
Yeah.
And I just feel like the word mighty I associate with Mighty Max and Mighty Mouse and Syracuse, courtesy of you. And I just feel like that it just so beautifully encapsulates it. And even the fact that like, it's a mural that's kind of hidden. Like, it's not something that like you're going to walk and just like instantly see. Like, you got to kind of hunt it down. Like, there's so many elements of this like canvas and this piece of work that just speaks to the spirit of us.
Right on. And like I've seen it used like in the mayoral candidate campaigns, in the back of like hip hop and hardcore videos, like, and then like people just like taking their picture in front of it, like, and which is cool. So like after the mural is done, it's like no longer mine, it now like belongs to the city, and that is such an honor to be able to like have had a hand in like this is my small brick in the pyramid of like the feel and texture of Syracuse. It's absolute honor.
But I also think it's a testament to just like your lack of ego and your willingness to make art for the right reasons. I mean, like, there's so many people who like make public art and like it's theirs forever, and this is my contribution, blah blah blah. And like you made a public resource and a public statement that people can choose to interact with. And like I just love the wonder and joy that comes from you when you see people choose how that's going to impact them.
Right on.
It's awesome. And you also did another beautiful And I Still Rise mural on the side of the Delavan, correct?
Yeah. And that's a 90-foot long Phoenix, and that one was also such a joy to paint. And that one was really cool because it's on the first level, so like I could interact with the people walking by and the people of the neighborhood. And that was one that was voted on by the people of the community there, which I thought was a really important part of the process of like actually like asking the neighborhood, like, what do y'all want to have here? This is your neighborhood. Like, I'm not just going to come in and be like, here, now you live with my artwork. No, like, what do you like? How do we make something that like actually like speaks to you? So like this was at the end of like, COVID. I mean, the end of like the lockdown sort of era of COVID. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I thought the message rang true for a bunch of different ways, because I love that poem by Dr. Maya Angelou. It just speaks like of like joy of Black people, and like to me like it spoke like, because I'm I'm Mexican, and like so like it's like a lot of the stories that you hear about Mexican people are like the stories that have existed like in the past, or like we're like gangsters, like bad dudes, whatever, like there's no room to expand the narrative of who we are. And I think that's sort of what the poem is talking about, is expanding the narrative of like a Black figure, what I mean? Expand it into joy. When you think like, oh, am I supposed to be sad? Nah, I rise. Still I rise. And I just thought it's such a beautiful and empowering poem. And with the population there, people seem to be like into it. And I got that over and over again as I'm painting it. People were like, yo, I love this. I love that. And then it just like, it kind of brought it into a different layer of meaning when someone was just like, I think it was my wife that said that like people are going to grow up with that mural and they're going to remember it as an adult, like walking by it as a kid or whatever. And I'm just like, oh yeah. Like, it's not just here for this moment in time. It's like something that lasts a long time. So it'll last, like, it'll be a part of the community, especially because it's on ground level. It's like, it's meant to be experienced like up close and personal. You can touch it. And so many people came by just telling me how much they loved it and they were so happy it was going up. And when you experience the mural, even driving by from Gear Factory toward Armory Square, the phoenix like blooms out across the street with these bright bold colors, and I'm like, I hadn't even thought about the way it would appear as you're driving down the road, but the way it kind of comes out, it's almost like it's flying toward you as you're driving by it. And I don't know, I absolutely love it. And so I got the permission from the estate of Dr. Maya Angelou to use those lines on the mural, and that was just sort of like an extra little, like, not little, huge, like, amazing, because it's not just my work, it's using these empowering words of Dr. Maya Angelou. It's also like another gift to the city that I'm just like so honored to be able to have had like the permission to do that.
And I've got goosebumps. I'm just like so stoked just to like know that the people that I know are the ones that are impacting our community. Because I think that there's something to be said about like being a kid and being in a city and like just seeing all these amazing things and just being like, I am taken over by this. Like I am insignificant, and look at this amazing place. And then for me anyway, I have a hard time like growing up and thinking to myself like, oh, this can be me. Like I can be the person that's like making these things. And like, just, I'm so honored to just be at that point in my life where like the people that I interact with are the ones that are like helping a new generation be able to see themselves in the space and feel empowered from that.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, and it's an honor to be able to make public art, and I think that public art really changes an entire city's attitude toward art in general, because it's not something that's like whole like blocked off in some like square building. It's something that you could live with. It's in our lives, and so like just if art is around and you're like, oh yeah, I can experience in art and love it. It's in my life. Whereas like when it's like behind glass doors, it's sort of like, it's almost like you can't touch it unless you're like allowed in this space, unless you're, you would normally like just in your everyday life go in this space. But public art, it does something completely different. It's like it's in the space that you're going to be in anyways. It's like it's there and living along with the city, living with the city.
It's amazing. I want to ask you just a couple other questions just about specific projects, and then I want to talk about comics because I think we need to get there. But one thing I didn't know about you is that I've always seen you design work for bands. Like I said, there's a band called Difficult that's wonderful that you designed some stuff for. You're working with Paper Rabbit right now. You did some work with Mayflower, but you also designed merchandise for the Deftones and Incubus.
Yeah, that was actually kind of early on, and I didn't even realize that this is how they worked. But there was a website before, I don't remember what it's called, but people would put like t-shirt designs, and then bands would go on this website and like look at these designs and be like, yo, let me work with you. But mostly like smaller bands. But then that site got shut down, and then months later I got an email from someone who were like, hey, I'm a merchandising company that works with Deftones, and they would really like to work with you on a t-shirt design. I'm like, what? Like, I don't like who, how do you even, so I don't know. I imagine somebody like, I imagine they talked to a bunch of different designers and just like, oh, we like that. But somebody must have seen it. And so the merchandising company reached out to me, and I was just like, yeah, sure. Like, I don't know. I had no idea how it worked, but luckily they were like, no, we tell you how it works. We actually, like, you can't say a price, we say the price. I'm just like, okay, you know what I mean? So it was like, we pay you to come up with some concepts, and if we pick your concepts, we pay you a little bit more. And it was like, it wasn't a ton of money, but it was really cool. And so, I did one set, and they were just like, cool, like, we like this design, we'll take that design. I'm just like, great, that was painless. And they came back to me again. They're just like, you want to do another one? I'm just like, sure. And then I kind of realized that like there was a sort of stable of artists that they go to for like all these different designs. And so, and then I imagine that they just kind of show the bands like, here are all possible designs, and they pick what designs they want, or what designs they want to like secure for maybe production, And so I got to do a couple for Deftones, one for Incubus, with Dawes, and then I was like this close to doing one for Paul McCartney, but it was such a, like, I was just like, I choked. I mean, I gotta be honest. Like I choked. I was just like, it's too big. Like I can't, and I gave him a design that I knew was just like not my best work, but I don't know what, like, I hardly ever like joke like that, but I definitely was like, this is like Paul McCartney, you know what I mean? So that one didn't work out, but I mean, I was still able to do design. So I at least got my work to get a no from Paul McCartney team or whatever. So that was just, it was just kind of random. And then I was talking to one of the other, like, my internet art friends, and he was just like, yeah, I do a bunch of them, but it's really like you got to do a lot of them. So it's sort of like it's my full time job doing this right now, but I do like 5 a day, and I'm just like, ooh, that's a heavy lift. Like I don't want to do that. Like it's cool. Like it's definitely cool. And like if you do a lot, you know, you can make good money doing it. But it would take up every single bit of your time. You know, you have to really dedicate yourself to like just like band merch and only band merch.
When you write your memoir, it can be called From White Pony to Black Rabbit. I feel
Right
like
on.
that'll be your Deftones
Right
memoir
on.
story. The other thing I want to talk to you about is, I'm going to apologize again, my pronunciation is horrendous, but Futurismo Latina art show that you did with La Casita Cultural Center.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting because the idea of futurism is something that I'm seeing in so many I don't know, sort of like different cultural and ethnic landscapes. Like John Jennings is somebody who's done a lot of like work with Afrofuturism, which has been really interesting. And you did this whole art show like about futurism for the Latino community. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite art shows that I've ever done. Um, and that was something that grew out of like I had been like really like digging into like, you know, culture, like trying to understand, you know, my culture, my indigenous ancestry, and like, you know, sort of like what Chicanismo means to me. Like Chicano is Mexican American, right? So it's like this is how I refer to myself. Like I'm not Mexican, I'm not American, I'm a Chicano. So I'm like straddling both worlds. And there's this term in Nahuatl, which is the Mexica indigenous language, and the word is Nepantla, which is like in between. And I feel like that word really describes the Chicano experience in America. We're like people of in between place. And so like I'd been thinking about this a lot, you know, writing about it in, you know, sort of like poems that I don't necessarily share, but like I'm really like thinking about that in terms of like uh, comics, storytelling, and like reading books that have this sort of theme. There's this really fantastic story called The Last Cuentista, like The Last Storyteller, that I read, and I'd never seen science fiction with Chicano centered protagonists, and I was just like, this is amazing. And then I also had read because I'm a big reader, like I love to read and I love fantasy, and I love to be able to find fantasy that has brown people centered in the story and not just like some like character that's relegated to the sidelines or, you know, villainized or whatever. And it was just sort of like this repeating uh, cultural erasure that I kept seeing of you know, like of like crowding out Latinos, indigenous voices from being centered in stories of the future. And so, you know, reading Rebecca Rowan Horse's, you know, Trail of Lightning, which is like fantasy story with an indigenous protagonist, and reading The Last Cuentista, and then some of the work of David Bowles, and getting to know some of like the comics community that are doing this type of work in like in Texas and California and New Mexico, and so I was just like, well, how can I lend my voice to this? How can I add my brick in the pyramid of this sort of like emerging thing? Because I hadn't like I had never really like thought about like futurism. I mean, I've seen like Afrofuturism. I thought it was like cool as hell. I saw these like really cool like fashion shows that were happening in like and like, you know, countries in Africa that were just like the coolest stuff, like just the coolest clothes. There was like performative like fashion shows that were like just so beyond awesome. And so then I started looking into, you know, where is this in my culture? And it was like there's so few voices, but there are voices there that are making this work. But it's like, why is this not in the consciousness, in the American consciousness? And so there's this Fernando Flores, who is a writer in Texas. He works in I think it's El Paso, but I'm not sure. But he wrote this fantastic book called Tears of the Truffle Pig, and it's like these like it's like a detective story, but also like it's about like genetic engineering of like animals that uh have been extinct. They're being revived for these like this rich conglomerate to like. I don't want to give too much away about the book, but it's really cool. And like again, like where I hadn't seen the Chicano voice, centered in these stories. So I was just like I really like I so desperately like wanted to add to it because I love reading it and I love like hearing about these stories. And so whenever Tere uh, approached me from La Casita, she's just like, "Do you have an idea?" And I'm just like, "I know exactly what I want to do." And this was right around the same time that I was approached by someone from New Mexico, University of New Mexico, Matthew Goodwin, who teaches Chicano studies out there, and he was putting on a conference, Latinx speculative fiction conference, and he had seen my work, I think through my affiliation with Professor Latinx, who's a professor at University of Austin, and he had a bunch of comic book artists come down to a symposium for BIPOC creators, comic creators and stuff like that, and sort of like expanding the narrative of like the Latino voice, right? And so I think he'd seen my work there. So he invited me to make a poster for this conference, and I was just like, "Yo, Latinx speculative fiction, like this is like it's like right up my alley." And so I ended up like, and I'm like, if there's like, what else is going on with this conference that you're doing? Is there like an art show or something? Like, can I come down and like sell stuff or like I want to go to it. And so he's just like, yeah, it's open to the public. Come down. But I came up with this poster and I was like, I had such a blast making it. And I'm just like, there's more here. There's more in me. It's very fertile ground of like, centering these voices. And if you ever see the poster, it's like this sort of like indigenous Chicana, like walking through this sort of like dry desert landscape. And there's these like terraformer like pods that are in the background. And I'm just like, and they're going towards these like I had this whole story in my mind of like, these pods were meant to like reinvigorate this world with new sacred water from like the old planet, right? And the figure in the foreground has she's like she's the keeper of like books, and so like she has a backpack that's full of books, so she's like the keeper of stories. And so I was just like, this was so much fun, I want to do more. And so then the opportunity to create a piece for the art show, a speculative fiction art show, came up, and this was like at the same time the La Casita show was coming up. And so I'm just like, they kind of like were working in tandem. But I made it work for this for the speculative fiction conference first, and I had the idea of like uh, carrying the sacred water of Yanaguana, which is like the waterways in San Antonio where my ancestry is from. And there's these sacred pools of water that there's all sorts, like a lot of the indigenous people from there like have a cosmological stories about this water, and this is me exploring, like I'm trying to figure out like where does my family actually connect to the people that were here before, and I don't know, so we can only like explore, and so I was thinking like, but what happens if in a world where we had listened to our indigenous ancestors, and our indigenous ancestors were able to pass on this knowledge in the form of water, what would that look like? And what would it look like 100 years into the future? And so then I started to imagine like it would have to be like there'd be like these guardian sentinel like mechanical creatures that like maybe they were like maybe they're Mexica, maybe they're Coahuiltecan, and I did it's sort of like what comes to mind. And so I started thinking about like jaguar warriors, which is like there's a special um a kind of warrior in Mexica society that was called a jaguar warrior. So I'm like, well, what if it was like a mechanical jaguar warrior, but it was carrying this sacred water? What would it look like? And so I started exploring that idea, and I came up with this really cool painting, sent it off to that show, and I'm like, this is the first painting of this whole show that I'm going to make at La Casita. And it was all like, creating a vision of the future that would typically not be created unless it's like someone like of my ancestry that's creating it. So I'm just like, well, what would it look like for us if we were centered in these stories? How would we carry our story forward? What would the machines look like if it was like if we were able to carry our indigenous knowledge into the future what would it look like if it was like, like this, because it really is a mixture of like Chicano culture, like indigenous culture, like this, all the things that I explore about who I am and where my family comes from. Like, how would it look? But also like, what does the neighborhoods look like? What happens if we actually like understand that like water is sacred, that like we take care of things. So like the idea, the idea of solar punk, it's sort of like steampunk, but it's like if we made the correct decisions on the environment, because really like when I started making this, developing this world, I'm like, you can't really talk about visions of the future without talking about the environment. You can't talk about it without talking about like what do we do with the place that we're living in. So then I sort of created this world, and so I made these like little scenes and cut out. I kind of mix like sign painting aesthetics, installation aesthetics, and like my actual painting to create like this sort of like walk around view inside La Casita. And I think it was like, I mean, lots of people came out. People seemed to like it, and there was these young students that came out from SU that were like really into it, and it was so beautiful to talk to them. And like it was also a heavy lift too, because there's all these like ideas about like identity and like, who am I to envision a future for all of us. Like, so it was just sort of like this weird, like it took a lot out of me emotionally, while also like I knew I wanted to say this. And but it was also like I always like in it when in the sort of like fine art world, I always question like, do I have a right to say these things? And it was my niece actually who was helping me do the installation. She was like, this is the show that I have always wanted to exist. And I was just like, even now I get emotional thinking about it, because like it means like it has like, and she was, telling me like it meant something to her personally, the work that I was creating. And like some of the SU students were, kind of like echoing that a bit. And it was just like, if I can have this stuff mean something to somebody, especially like, like a young Chicano or Chicana, like that, then I feel like I've done something good, and helped to sort of like move forward our imaginings of what the future could look like and put us there.
And I think like, you probably sit there and you're like, you're hustling so much that it's like, okay, I've got to do this thing and here's all these ideas and blah, blah, blah. And then you sit there and you look at it and you say like, am I worthy of this message? But like, this is a message that you've been building in your brain for 30 years. Like this is like you thinking critically about like the way I've seen the world change, the way in which I've seen my identity change, the way I've seen people who don't have the ability to express their identity, building up to this moment where like you're being identified as the messenger for this space. Like there's just such an amazing confluence of things that happen to make this art show.
Yeah. I mean, it was a beautiful experience, and I really loved it. And it was like I said, it was very difficult. Like at the end, I had to just like, I really like I burnt out after that show, because I was like simultaneously as I was making the show, I was still hustling and doing like weekend craft shows and like trying to make money, and then like coming back to like this really heavy like emotional work. And then so like by the end, I was just like, I overdid it. I definitely overdid it, and like I had to just like, and luckily earlier in the year, I'd seen a drawing retreat that was just like, hey, like come to this drawing retreat for a week. You don't got to do nothing. You just sit and you draw. And I had signed up for it so I could get the early bird special, like, months and months in advance. And it came at just the right time, right when I was ready to just like collapse. I mean, like it got to the point where like I was staying up to like, 2 a.m, waking up at 6, and it was like full effort all day long. And it was just like, day after day after day after day. And like, I was like, I felt myself being like constantly on the edge of like breakdown, but I'm just like, there's more to do. I want like, and I was still driven. I still want like I want it to be good. I want everything to work out. But I was really like at this like cliff's edge of just like I can't. I've got no more in the tank. Like there's not even fumes left. I have nothing left to give. I put it all out there, and like right at that moment of just like absolute collapse, I was able to collapse into this residency, this week-long residency, and it was like I learned my limit at that point, and so when I got there, I literally just like first night I just cried. I just like went in the room and I just cried, and just like kind of like, it was just like, because I'd done that show, a show in Canandaigua as well, like right before that. And then just like, I think it was like 8 weekend shows in a row of just like, selling stuff. And like, I think the last one was in Philadelphia. And so I like got back home, did the opening, and then I'm just like, I'm done. Like I can't, there's no more brain space for literally anything else. And then it was like the next week that I went to the retreat, and it was like the perfect time. And what did I do there? I drew comics.
It's like you knew that was the next question. So, for me as a fan of your work, I want to take a step. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to just say like, this is the limit and the capacity that I have as a human.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll now go back to the, as a fan of your work and as somebody who's been following for a very long time, I'm so used to you being the person who is at every craft fair and is just over the moon to be welcomed into certain spaces. I very much associate you with the Westcott Nation community,
Right.
despite not living there. Like you're just such like an important staple that when you transitioned, or at least in my brain transitioned to working on this small little, printed pamphlet, these little zines, where I'm seeing in Savage Dragon, or I'm seeing your stuff posted online, or I'm seeing your individual books. It just seemed like such a crazy turn from, instead of like, I don't know if we think of your art as like almost like single panel statements, like that's what your signs are and whatnot, to like all of a sudden I'm going to start telling these kind of like immersive, fantastical narratives. For me, it was just like, wow, okay, here's another obsessive medium for him to like jump into, but it's something that's followed you like your entire career. Like what, like now I view you as being like, I'm in the comics phase of my life. Like tell us a little bit about these comic projects, because you've got so many stories to tell.
Right on. Well, I mean, I think like I feel that I am a storyteller. Like I love telling stories. I love hearing stories. It's my favorite. Like it's one of my favorite things to be able to do. That's why like I'm a big reader, because I love story. Everything is made out of stories. And so like, I was introduced to comics like back in high school, and I've been reading, but not all the way through. In college, I sort of like I dropped off for pretty much 3.5 years, and near the end of my college career, I started making comics again as a way of coping with trauma and stuff like that. But I had these characters in my head for the longest time, and whenever COVID hit, I was just sort of like, everyone was sort of like, oh, we're just everything stopped. Like, so, and I felt like I was in a pretty good place, because I was able to pivot. So I could do, cause I've been, working on like, I could do merchandise, I can do logo design, I can do, I could still, make posters and stuff like that, and ship stuff. I was able to, cause at that point I had built on my website and I was like shipping already. So, I was able to like still make money through that lockdown, but it was like there was potentially these big empty spaces of like nothing to do. So I'm like, well, I'm stressed out. Let me do what I have done in the past to deal with trauma. I'm going to sit at my drafting table. I'm going to draw stories. So I started pulling out some of my old stuff, and I'm like, there's a story here that I have been wanting to tell for so long, and it always ended up in the back burner. And that was like my the cathead character that I was drawing in college. But there's a whole huge story there that I think, as I pulled it out, I'm like, this is still really viable. And I had actually, like, back in 2009, I'd put out 2 zine style comics of that story. They weren't good. I didn't know what I was doing. I just drew comics. I just drew them real quick and we put them out. And people bought them. But when I brought those back out, I'm like, oh, these are still good. Like I still really like these. Like, so then, as COVID hit, I'm just like, let me just draw some stuff. And boy, I had a blast. And I was just like, oh, it gave me so much fulfillment. And it was also really challenging too. Like once I dug into like, how do you actually like tell stories in comic form? And I had gotten the Scott McCloud books, and like, I'd been, reading comics, and like I had like a huge collection of like comics that I hadn't really even looked at for a while. But once I started really opening them and seeing like how the stories are actually told, I'm like, oh, this is hard. This is really hard. And I'm just like, but it put a smile on my face. I'm just like, oh yeah, like let me. This is gonna be really difficult. I love it. Like it's gonna be learning, all learning. And so I was like, I everything became about comics. And of course my family and trying to figure out like what was happening in the world. That's and my hair turned white. It was a super stressful time. But when I was drawing comics, it was like when I was a kid, everything just shut off, all this stress, everything just like quieted down, and it gave me some breathing room to escape into this world. And so I fell in love with it all over again, like hard, like I fell head over heels in love with comics. And I started talking to my buddy Frank Camuso, who's also a comic book artist, and he's a illustration professor over at SU. And we were playing D&D online, his kid and my kid. And so I was just like, cool. Like I'm like after the D&D's over, we would just talk comics. And he's such a great guy. Like I really love Frank. He's just a really swell fellow, and like I've known him for a while, and like I had talked to him actually years before just about art and comics and stuff, because I've always been like kind of like tiptoeing around comics, but it's like I said, it always ended up in the back burner. But for COVID, I was able to like, well, no longer back burner. It is now on the front burner, and I'm gonna do it. I sort of made a decision like I'm gonna do comics, and as I'm drawing it, everything that I was listening to was like, do not start with this huge epic story. And I'm just like, oh, that's what I want to do. But it is really hard. So I don't want to like, everyone's saying like, you're going to put all this work into it and you're going to realize that something's wrong. You have to go back and change it. And I'm just like, ah. But then as I started working on it, I'm just like, oh, damn, they're right. They're absolutely right. So then I started trying to figure out like how to do short stories. And so like this, the first like zine comic that I put out was Night Moves, which started as an Inktober project. I was like, I'm just going to draw these little squares, and I'm going to put out a comic on Instagram, and people seem to enjoy it. So I'm just like, I'll just keep on drawing. I kind of see where the story takes me, and then as I'm drawing it, I'm just like, ooh, I think I've got the whole story kind of like in my mind. So I'm like, I think I can do this in 3 issues. So then I just decided, well, I'm just going to do this in 3 issues and see what happens. And it was really tough to actually finish it, because I'm learning as I'm drawing it. And also while I'm drawing it, I'm drawing like little 1-page stories with an online group called the Cartoons Kayfabe Ringside Seats. So and I was watching the Cartoons Kayfabe YouTube channel like as I drew, and I felt like I was getting all the homework about comics that I never got early on. Just like learning about the medium and learning like who's who in comics. So I really didn't know anybody. I knew there was a few artists that I liked, but I was learning so much more just by being part of the community and like interacting with everybody. And I was working on comics and sending those off, and eventually like visiting my local comic shop, and I met my buddies over there, and plus one of my friends, Aaron Lee, he also was drawing comics, so I started talking with him because I just needed like to talk to people that are actually making comics. And so once I started like talking to them, Evan from the Oswego comic shop, like he happened to speak to Eric Larson every once in a while, and just like online. And so he sent him a message along with some of my work, and he's just like, yo, that's beautiful. I should publish that. And then Evan like sent me a message. He's like, hey, you want to talk to Eric Larson? I'm just like, what? And he's just like, yeah, he likes your work. And I'm just like it was out of nowhere. And so so I ended up talking with him, and he loved the work, and he published it. He published a short story, one of the short stories I was working on, which really wasn't even for anything. I was just drawing it to learn the medium, and so that's why it's kind of formatted weird. But like he took it and put it in Savage Dragon 266, and that was sort of like, it was amazing. But also, I don't know if you noticed, but somehow my name is literally nowhere on that issue, and like he didn't catch it. It was like already too late. Like he was just before it was even noticed. And so Evan had called me up, and he's just like, "Hey man, the comics are here." And I'm just like, "Oh sweet." Like he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Uh-oh, what? Like what happened?" He's like, "Your name is nowhere on it." Cause like I didn't write my name on it, and it wasn't printed. And so I was just like, "Hey Eric," and he's like, "Yeah, I just saw that. Like it's sorry, bud. Like they're all printed. So like, yeah, I'll fix you up in the next issue," which he did. And he just was like, those comics were all drawn by Cayetano Valenzuela and like blah blah. So I'm just like, all right, good enough. It's awesome, super cool. Because I remember like look back in the day, like finding Image Comics, and like, I had been reading the Max, and like I love the Max, and then my buddy was in Savage Dragon for the longest time, and so like I'm familiar with this stuff, and I'm just like, it's just cool to be like included. All this stuff started happening like in comics as I started to make it and just like put them out there, and it started like people started paying attention. But even now, I feel like I'm still like in the infancy of really learning the medium. Although now I feel like I'm really cooking now, especially with the project I'm working on now. I've got a couple in the works, and like it's so much fun. And every time I have like entire days to like dedicate to comics, they're the best days. And I'm just like, I have so much fun. I feel so energized, and it's a totally beautiful and challenging process that I can't get enough of.
It's such a just phenomenal medium as well, like just in the sense that like, so I'm teaching a digital humanities class right now, and you mentioned Scott McCloud earlier, and like we read Understanding Comics in it. It's a class where we're talking about like making digital art, but like there's just been this like wave of people that are so obsessed with the medium that they've dedicated weeks, months, years, lifetimes to just like getting word out there about all like the lack of limitation, and how empowered you can feel choosing to tell stories in this medium.
Yeah.
And I just like, a lot of people will go and will decide, I want to make comics, and their only goal is to like do the Batman story or do the Incredible Hulk story. Or on the flip side, their only goal is to like go as independent as possible, and I'm going to tell my memoir in the comics medium, and people are going to connect with that. And I just like looking at you, as always, like it's shifted to the side where it's like, I'm gonna do my work. I'm gonna see who connects with it, and in this case, it's one of the founders of Image Comics, Eric Larson. It's Frank Camuso, Tom Pyre, Hart Seeley at Ahoy Comics, who have published some of your imagery for their short stories and things like that. But also like, you're so immersed not in just making the comics, but also like, I'm going to learn how risographs work, and I'm going to print these, and I'm going to figure out a new, format to get them bound in, and I'm going to sell them online, but I'm also going to go to small press expos, and I'm going to keep doing the hustle with the craft shows. Like, to me, it's just like another means of like Cayetano's like story, like, as an artist, like I can look at your work and see that through line where it's like, oh, here's the new thing he's got offered at his table. Like, it still fits your aesthetic so beautifully.
Well, that's why I try. I mean, I think it's one of my sticking points. I try to keep everything within like a brand, but like I'm a human being, man. Like I'm curious. So like I want to try everything. But I think like one of the through lines in the imagery and the type of work that I make that I distribute is wonder and magic. Like that's what I peddle, is like wonder and magic. And I'm fascinated by it. I mean, like my upbringing too, like all of our stories, like family stories, like a lot of times it's like ghost stories, the devil, like things like that. Like there's these really intense like folklore stories that like I didn't even realize were weird until I came up here and started telling these stories that were like the Lechuza and La Llorona, and like El Cucuy, like all these stories that were like embedded in the culture, like woven through, are like scary fantasy stories, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And so like, and that's why like I think like in all the work that I make, I'm looking and I'm just like magic and wonder, magic and wonder, magic and wonder. And like that's what I'd like to, that'll be like when I'm gone, like hopefully like some of it stays.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually wearing your Read More Books t-shirt right now. Oh, right on. And I feel like just as I'm putting it on this morning and I'm like looking in the mirror, I'm just like it elevates my passion and my interest in like just immersing myself in a narrative. And then when I'm, looking at Night Moves, and, the opening panels are just, a jack-o'-lantern that seems like it's just been kind of like disregarded for a moment, almost like Toy Story style. Like we're stepping out of the room and then all of a sudden it grows legs and it stands out and whatever. And like in the span of less than a page, or in the span of a page or so, like I am pulled into your world so completely. It's just it's amazing, and I like get that same elation when I look at your signs and I look at, I mean, something as simple as like going into recess and ordering a cup of coffee. I'm like, it's elevated because I know it has this like human touch to it.
Right on. Yeah, and that, like, I think like things that are made by hand, things that I control the means of production. You know what I mean? Like, and that's power. You know what I mean? That's how I control. You know what I can. That's my sense of control in the world is like I get to make stuff. I want to make what I want to make. Like I'm not gonna make what you want me to make. I'm gonna make what I want to make, and I'm gonna make it as beautiful and cool as possible. Because like at the end of the day, like I want it to be cool too. Like I want to make something beautiful, magical, and meaningful, and I want it to look cool at the same time. Yeah,
You got a good aesthetic for that.
right on.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to sort of cover? Anything on your mind right now?
No, just I'm working on a new comic book. Like after Night Moves. Night Moves is completed now. It's the 3 issues, and I've got there's an anthology that's going to be coming out later in the year. That's all about Latinx connection with food and home and family, and that's coming out through Ohio State Press is publishing it. I don't know exactly when it's coming out, but it was put together by Dr. Frederick Aldama, who we all lovingly call Professor Latinx. So he gathered a bunch of us together to work on this anthology. So I'll have a story in that, and then my personal story that I'm working on now is a return to that initial cat head character that is going to be that long epic story, and I'm just going to put it out, you know, like as I make it. I'm not going to put any pressure on it or a timeline, except that that's my next personal project. Is the cat head story, and I'll be done with a redraw of issue number 1 in June. I'm not sure exactly when in June, but it's gonna be coming out in June. So that'll be coming out, and I'm really proud of how it's looking right now.
That's awesome. So at the drop of this podcast, look out for new work and new comics from you, which brings me to the most important part, which is like, how do people follow you? Like what's the best means to sort of get the Cayetano story?
Right. Well, I think I'm most active on Instagram, and that's either my full name, Cayetano Valenzuela, which is my main art account, but I have Just Comics, a Just Comics account that is Black Rabbit Comics on Instagram. And I'm on Facebook, but hardly ever. And I try to look at X or Twitter or whatever, but I'm not good at it. So Instagram for sure. Cool. And then also the blackrabbitstudio.com is the website.
Awesome. And I'll, just say that like for listeners that are Central New Yorkers, like check out the work, feel empowered, go from there. But for listeners who are not familiar with, Lake Ontario and Central New York and this whole world, go look at this artwork, because I think that you're going to get a really interesting perspective about what the spirit of Central New York is. So, Cayetano, I'm going to, again, apologize for pronouncing your name wrong at least 15 times in this interview, but thanks so much for coming on, man.
Man, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
All right. Now we have a telepathic moment. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Are you desperately wondering if you have a paintbrush in your house to go paint the side of a building and see if you can also captivate a town or make a comic that will tell a story you've been holding on to for decades? I'm just so energized about art making right now after talking with Cayetano. And I want to again thank him for being on the show and being willing to just be so vulnerable and open and honest with his story. Such an amazing creator. If you're unfamiliar with his work, please, please, please get your Google on and see the just amazing things that he can do with brush and pen. It's marvelous. And if you're local to Syracuse or if you're in the area, go see his public work. Go stand in front of the We Are the Mighty Salt City mural and just see how it makes you feel. I bet you'll discover something new about yourself. As we move forward, if you're new to this show, I want to just talk about my back catalog very briefly. I like to bring on as many people from as many cool backgrounds as possible. So for example, if you are a Goosebumps kid, you loved horror in the 90s, or you're discovering it now, Tim Jacobus was on episode 21. He was the cover artist for all those famous Goosebumps books by R.L. Stine in the 90s. Amanda Hughes, the owner of the ice cream stand, is on episode 20 and kindly talks about, serving sweets in Clinton Square in Syracuse, New York, and seeing how you can build community with any type of business. Phil Vigent is on episode 13 talking about Super 8mm film and the Hollywood film business on a micro scale. Tim Allen is a stop motion animator based in the UK who worked on such films as Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio and Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox. You can listen to him on episode 10. And another hometown hero, CJ Butler, who works at the Salt City Market, is on episode 9. So if you're interested in just having some more open dialogue fed to your brain, you can do that with the back catalog of Meditations with Ryan Zlomek. Coming up on June 19th, we have our next episode with Dean Haspiel. Dean is most famously a comic book artist known for working with Harvey Pekar and Jonathan Ames and doing a bunch of cool books on his own, most recently through Kickstarter. He also was one of the creatives behind the TV show on HBO Bored to Death, for which he won an Emmy Award. And he kind of, not secretly, but is less famous for an art form that I think is really cool. He is a playwright who has written several plays that have been produced on small stages in Brooklyn, New York. Most recently, a play called The War of Woo, which featured some actors from The Walking Dead, which was pretty neat. He's on the show on June 19th for our next episode, just to talk about the process of playwriting and making art in Brooklyn, which is pretty cool. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and please, please, please review the show. Send it to people that you think might be interested and just sort of help to get the word out there. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at The World of Ryan Zlomek. You can email me, meditations@ryanzlomek.com. But most importantly, please make sure to make space for conversation in your own life, because you just might learn something. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll return soon. Have an amazing, rockin' day.